She stood at the edge of our front pasture, hands on hips, lips curled like she'd just bit into a lemon. I knew that look. It was her, the self-appointed queen of our neighborhood HOA. Everyone called her Karen, though her real name was Linda. But that day, she wasn't just angry about fence height or mailbox color. She was staring down my 8-year-old daughter like she'd just trespassed on sacred ground. The sun was barely up and my daughter was just feeding her pony like she did every morning. Our land was quiet, peaceful. The kind of place we bought to raise her away from the noise and nonsense of the city. But somehow, nonsense always finds a way. I walked out to see what the problem was. Karen didn't say good morning. She just snapped, "Your daughter can't be out here with that animal. It violates our HOA rules." What rules? We own 6 acres. We're not even inside the neighborhood limits. But that didn't stop her from pulling out her phone and calling the cops on a child feeding her pony. And here's where things took a turn I didn't expect. Within 3 minutes of that call, everything she thought she controlled crumbled. And I don't mean she got a warning or a fine. I mean her precious HOA was gone. Dissolved. Wiped out like it never existed. How did one phone call set off a chain of events that would unravel years of power trips, fines, and threats? And why was she so determined to control a piece of land she had no authority over? This story isn't just about property lines or neighborhood drama. It's about standing up to bullies with clipboards, the power of truth when it's backed by the law, and the unexpected allies who show up when it matters most. Because when someone messes with your child, especially on your own land, you don't just stand by. You fight back. And as the officer stepped out of his car and looked at Karen, something shifted. Her smug face faltered. That's when I knew she'd made a mistake. A big one. She didn't always act like this. When we first moved in, Karen, Linda, seemed like just another retired woman who liked walking her little white dog and collecting mail early. She gave us a smile once. Maybe twice. But the moment she found out we weren't technically part of the HOA, despite being on land that bordered the neighborhood, her tone changed. Suddenly we were non-compliant and unregulated. She'd leave little printed notices on our gate, reminding us of rules we didn't agree to. At first, I laughed it off. My husband said it was harmless. But then the tone of her messages changed. She complained about our chickens. Then the barn colors. Then the tractor sounds. And now somehow my daughter feeding her pony in the morning was enough to summon the police. I'll never forget the way my daughter looked up at me that morning, confused, scared. Her pony, Daisy, nudged her shoulder, sensing the tension. Karen stood stiff like she was on some kind of HOA battlefield, armed with bylaws and entitlement. As the sheriff stepped out of his cruiser, the whole pasture felt like it was holding its breath. He took one look at my daughter, the pony, the wide-open field behind us, and then turned to Karen. "Ma'am," he said calmly, "can you explain the emergency?" Karen didn't falter. "They're in violation of the HOA. That animal is not allowed here. This is against the community's rules." The sheriff blinked. Slowly. Then he turned to me. "Do you live within the HOA's jurisdiction?" "No," I said simply, holding up the property survey paperwork I'd kept ready for moments like this. "We own everything from the creek to the fence line. Our property isn't under HOA control. Never has been." Karen's eyes narrowed. She pulled out her own stack of documents, shaking them at him like they were holy scripture. "They use our road. That makes them part of the agreement. It's in the Annex Addendum, Section 4. They owe dues and must comply." Her voice was rising. The sheriff raised a brow and asked her to walk him through the documents. She followed him to the cruiser, still waving papers. My daughter clung to my leg. And that's when I realized Karen wasn't just power-hungry. She was desperate. There was something more behind this. Something she was afraid of losing. We'd heard whispers, neighbors muttering about HOA funds not adding up, someone on the board resigning quietly last fall, a legal dispute that never made it to court. But we never connected the dots. Until now. Because as the sheriff read over her documents, his expression didn't change. But his body language did. He grew still. Serious. Then, after flipping a few more pages, he turned to look directly at me and asked, "Do you happen to have a copy of your original deed?" I nodded and walked back toward the house to grab the folder. My hands shook, not from fear, but from the weight of what might be happening. In that moment, I understood this wasn't just about my daughter, or a pony, or even an overreaching neighbor. This was about truth. and about what happens when someone builds their power on a lie and then meets the one person willing to challenge it. As I walked back to the house to retrieve our deed, 1,000 thoughts raced through my mind. My boots crunched over the gravel path, but all I could hear was my daughter's voice from earlier that week. "Mommy, why does that lady always look at me like she hates me?" I'd brushed it off at the time. I told her sometimes grown-ups are just grumpy. But now that question burned. Why did Karen care so much? Inside, I opened the old wooden file cabinet and pulled out the folder labeled Property, Legal. Dust floated in the sunbeams cutting through the kitchen window. I hesitated a second, then grabbed the folder and stepped back outside. But I wasn't alone anymore. Brian, our next-door neighbor, was walking across the pasture. He wasn't part of the HOA either. His ranch was on the other side of the easement road. Quiet guy, kept to himself. But today he looked tense. "You okay?" he asked. "Not sure yet," I replied. He gave a quick nod toward the patrol car where Karen and the sheriff were still talking. "She tried this with me last year. Threatened to fine me over my shed's roof color. Sent fake violation letters with HOA letterhead. I called a lawyer. That stopped me." "Fake." He nodded, then leaned in closer. "There hasn't been a legally recognized HOA here in over a year. Their charter expired. Nobody renewed it. But she's been running it like a kingdom ever since. No meetings, no elections, just Karen." I stared at him. "Why didn't you say anything?" He looked down at his boots. "Honestly, I didn't want the trouble. She's relentless. And I figured if someone with more fight than me came along, maybe it'd all come out." That's when I realized this wasn't just our battle. It never had been. By the time I got back to the patrol car, the sheriff was holding both sets of documents. He asked Karen to step aside while he reviewed them together. She looked ready to explode, her arms crossed tight, eyes darting from me to Brian and back again. Then the sheriff turned to me. "Ma'am, I'm going to need to make a couple of calls. Would you mind waiting while I confirm something with the county registrar?" Karen interrupted. "You don't need to call anyone. This is a waste of time. She's breaking community rules." But the sheriff wasn't looking at her anymore. He was studying the deed I gave him, eyes scanning every line. He pointed to a paragraph and murmured something under his breath. Then he walked back to his car to radio in. Tension hung over the field like a thundercloud. Meanwhile, my daughter had gone inside, upset. I sent my husband to check on her, but I stayed outside because something about that look on the sheriff's face told me this was bigger than anyone expected. That's when I spotted another figure approaching, Marcy, one of the few original HOA board members. She hadn't been seen much in months. She looked older than I remembered. Tired, but purposeful. She walked right up to me and said quietly, "I'm sorry. I should have spoken up sooner." Before I could respond, she added, "Karen's been forging signatures, running the HOA funds like they're her own." I stepped away when I saw where it was going, but I didn't stop it. That was my mistake. I stared at her, heart thudding. "Why now?" She sighed. "Because the sheriff just called me. He wanted to verify the signatures on those annual renewal forms." And I told him the truth. I never signed anything. Across the field, Karen's voice suddenly rose. She had heard. Her face turned pale as the sheriff walked back, phone in hand. But we still didn't know how far this went. And we still had no idea what Karen would do next when her back was against the wall. Because people like her don't go quietly. Karen's voice cracked through the heavy silence like a whip. "You can't trust her. She's just bitter. She left the board a year ago." The sheriff didn't flinch. He was still on the line with the county registrar, nodding slowly, jotting something down on the back of a citation pad. Karen spun toward me, her face blotchy with panic and rage. "This is a setup. You're trying to take me down because you don't like rules." I held my ground. My hands were steady now. My heart, not so much, pounded like thunder in my ears. Behind me, I felt Brian shift closer, protective. And Marcy, quiet and pale, kept her eyes low but her jaw set. The sheriff hung up. He took a long breath, then turned to Karen and said, "Ma'am, I need you to sit down. I have questions about these renewal documents, and we'll need to verify the names and dates." Karen didn't move. No, this isn't right. That's my HOA. I've been the acting president for 3 years. These people are just troublemakers. But her voice was thinning now, her control slipping. You said you held an annual election last June? The sheriff asked, flipping back through the documents. She nodded. Too fast. Funny, he said. Because the registrar has no record of a renewal filing, and at least 2 of the names on here passed away 2 years ago. Everything stopped. Karen's lips parted, but no sound came out. The air shifted, like the truth had finally cracked through whatever illusion she'd been hiding behind. Then footsteps. More people were coming. Neighbors. Some we hadn't seen in months. Word had spread quick. A few held printed violation slips. Others clutched letters with official HOA letterhead. One man had a photo of his house with a red circle drawn around a planter box, a fine taped below it. The look on Karen's face changed, from smug to shaken to cornered. And that's when she did something I didn't expect. She ran. Not far, just toward her car. But she moved fast, keys already out, like if she could get away quick enough, this would all dissolve with the dust behind her tires. The sheriff yelled her name. Brian stepped forward, blocking her path. Don't, he said, quiet but firm. Her hand shook. The sheriff approached slowly. Karen, if you leave now, it could be considered obstruction. She froze. 1 foot in the car. 1 hand on the door. And then she turned her gaze on me. Her face twisted, not just angry. Betrayed. Like she thought I had done this to her. Like I hadn't just stood up for my daughter and my land, but had somehow ripped something away from her. You don't understand, she whispered. I kept this neighborhood together. No, I said. You ruled it. The sheriff motioned her away from the car. She backed up, trembling now. Everyone watched in silence. Then, out of the blue, a voice piped up from the small crowd. What happened to the HOA fund, Karen? It was Marcy. Karen's face went blank. The crowd murmured. The sheriff looked up sharply. What fund? I asked. Marcy didn't take her eyes off Karen. She opened a separate bank account. Claimed it was for community beautification. Said it was authorized by a vote. There was no vote. Karen's hands clenched into fists. The tension was unbearable now. Like a string pulled too tight, moments from snapping. My daughter peeked from the window. I saw her watching all of this. I wanted to end it. But I knew this wasn't over yet. We were close. The truth was there just beneath the surface. And it was about to come out. The air was electric, thick with tension, truth, and things unsaid. Karen stood by her car, breathing hard, surrounded by neighbors who once feared her but were now united by something stronger, outrage. The sheriff had her documents in hand. Marcy had just exposed a secret fund. Everything was unraveling. But then Brian's phone buzzed. He pulled it from his pocket, glanced at the screen, and his eyes widened. He turned to me. You need to see this. He handed me the phone. On the screen was a photo and email attachment from another neighbor who hadn't been around in months. It showed Karen smiling in front of a podium at a local real estate networking event. The banner behind her read, "Turning private land into profitable communities." I read the caption out loud, voice shaking. HOA president and land consultant Karen Halley discusses her blueprint for voluntary community buyouts. The crowd murmured again, louder this time. Brian leaned in. She's been planning to sell the land around here, bit by bit. Quietly trying to fold people into a non-existent HOA so she could market this place to developers. Marcy stiffened. She wanted to dissolve the last of the independent properties. That's why she fought so hard with you. And just like that, it all clicked into place. The sudden rush of HOA violations, the fake signatures, the fake elections, it wasn't just control. It was greed. She wanted to pressure families like mine into leaving or conforming so she could sell the land as a package. That's why she went after my daughter. That's why the pony in the pasture mattered so much. It wasn't about the rules. It was about leverage. The sheriff's phone buzzed. He glanced at it and frowned. County registrar just confirmed those renewal documents are forged. Karen, we need to talk inside. Karen didn't move. She just looked at me. Then Marcy. Then the neighbors. Her voice came out barely above a whisper. I needed the money. It wasn't a defense. It wasn't even an apology. just a hollow echo of a choice that had finally caught up to her. But before anyone could speak again, there was a sudden crack. We all jumped. A noise from the pasture. The pony whinnied sharply. I turned. My daughter was no longer at the window. She was in the field again, kneeling beside the fence, crying. A loose nail from the old fence post had sliced her hand. Blood dripped into the grass. I ran. So did my husband. The sheriff called for a med kit. Karen just stood there watching, frozen. And something in that moment changed again. Because as I held my daughter, pressing a cloth to her hand, I realized this wasn't over because of what Karen had done. It was over because of what she almost cost us. My daughter was scared. Not just from the pain, but because the place she loved, our peaceful ranch, had become a battleground. I looked back at the sheriff. Whatever happens next, we need to make sure no one else ever gets dragged into this again. He nodded solemnly. And as the siren of a medic unit echoed in the distance, Karen finally sat down on the gravel, hands limp in her lap. For the first time since we'd moved here, she looked powerless. But part of me knew someone like Karen doesn't go down quietly, especially when there's still money on the table. The paramedics arrived fast, lights flashing soft red and blue across the field, streaking over the pony's white coat and my daughter's tear-streaked face. She was brave. She always had been. But when she saw the EMT with gloves and gauze, her voice cracked. "Mommy, can we go home?" I kissed her forehead. "We're already home, sweetheart. No one's taking it from us." As they patched her hand, the sheriff stepped aside, his notepad full, voice low on the phone with what sounded like county officials. Karen hadn't moved. She sat slumped on the gravel as if something had finally broken inside not just her scheme, but the illusion of control she had wrapped herself in for so long. Neighbors stood in clusters now. Some angry, some shaken, others quiet, processing what they'd learned. The ranch had always been more than land. It was roots, legacy, peace. Karen tried to turn it into leverage, into something transactional. The sheriff finally walked over to her. "Karen Halley, you're being taken in for questioning regarding forgery, financial misrepresentation, and harassment. You have the right to remain silent." She didn't argue, didn't cry, just nodded, eyes glassy like she'd already accepted it. It should have felt like victory. But standing beside my husband and daughter, the paramedics packing up, I just felt tired. Relieved, yes, but tired. Marcy walked over holding a wrinkled envelope. "This is from last year's budget meeting." Karen sent out ballots. None of us voted, but she still filed the results. Inside the envelope was a community notice, a list of approved changes for a development plan. Tiny print. Lots of legalese. But at the bottom, handwritten in Karen's precise cursive, final phase will involve annexing adjacent properties for HOA expansion. She had planned to absorb us, to pressure us out, sell the land, and retire wealthy while pretending it was all legal. But one detail stuck with me. A line in the meeting notes said, "Property at Eastern Edge still a problem, owner keeps detailed records. We'll need creative strategy." That was me. She had marked me as an obstacle. Not a neighbor. Not a mother. Just a box to check. I folded the paper and slipped it into my pocket. Evidence, yes, but also a reminder of why you have to stand up even when it's uncomfortable. Especially when it involves your family. The sheriff led Karen to the cruiser. She paused once, glanced back, not at me, but at the land. The hills rolling behind our barn. The last bit of something she thought she could control. Then she was gone. But just as we turned to head inside, Brian jogged over, phone out again. "You need to see this," he said, just like before. On screen was a video, an old one. A real estate forum uploaded to a private YouTube account. Karen on stage, mid-speech. And the trick, she was saying, smiling like a politician, is to make people believe they're part of something bigger. HOAs work when people are afraid to lose what they already have. She laughed. The audience laughed. But what sent a chill through me wasn't what she said next, it was the closing slide. A map. Our area. Highlighted lots. Arrows and red circles. And in the corner, circled in bold ink, our ranch. But above it all, one line was written in giant font. Target, legacy holdout, that's what we were to her. A holdout. An obstacle to her exit plan. But now? We were still standing. stronger than before. And for the first time it was quiet on our land again. No notices. No barking orders. Just the soft rustle of wind through the trees and my daughter giggling as her pony nuzzled her bandaged hand. A week after Karen was taken away, the land finally felt quiet again. Not empty, just still. The kind of stillness that comes after a storm, when the air smells like clean earth and things feel possible again. My daughter's hand healed quickly. She's back to brushing her pony each morning, talking to him like he's her best friend, which he probably is. Her fear melted away the moment she realized the pasture was still hers, that we were still here. Brian's become more of a presence too. He helped us repair the fence where the nail had come loose. Turns out he used to be a contractor before all this. Quiet strength. He told me the HOA fake-out was the last straw, and now, with Karen gone, he's thinking of forming a real neighborhood council. Voluntary. Transparent. A group that actually listens, not rules. Marcy visited again yesterday. She brought over a box, old HOA records she'd stashed away out of guilt. Inside were receipts, fake meeting minutes, even some bank transfers linked to Karen's private account. She offered them to the sheriff, but also to us. "You helped us all," she told me. I was too afraid to speak up. But when you did, I remembered who we used to be. Neighbors. Not clients. Not pawns. It hit me then, this was never just about property lines or bylaws. It was about power and fear. And what happens when people forget the difference between leadership and control. Our ranch is safer now, not because of fences or rules, but because we stood up. We didn't let someone else define what home meant. That's something my daughter will carry with her. That's something I will carry. The county officially dissolved what was left of the HOA. With Karen's forged renewals exposed and her actions under investigation, the entity had no legal standing. Every family in the area got a letter. You're free to manage your own land again. Some celebrated. Others just quietly nodded, grateful the tension was gone. A few moved away, the damage too deep. But for us, staying felt like the most powerful thing we could do. And I still think about that slide, target, legacy holdout. Like being someone who keeps something sacred was a threat. But I realize now, maybe it was. Because the ones who stand their ground? The ones who keep the old ways, who raise their kids with dirt under their nails and wind in their hair, they scare people like Karen. Because they can't be bought, or manipulated, or quietly erased. This land, this life isn't perfect. But it's ours. And that means more than any rulebook ever could. If you're listening to this and you're facing your own Karen, don't wait for permission to push back. Stand firm. Speak truth. Protect your peace even if your voice shakes. Because sometimes it only takes one person to make everyone else brave. And sometimes holding onto your land is how you hold onto yourself. Home isn't the walls you live in, it's the ground you refuse to surrender. So if you've ever been pushed, tricked, or bullied into silence, take this as your sign, stand up. Speak out. And if your story needs to be heard, tell it. Someone else might be waiting to do the same.